Ladies and gentlemen, due to our very tight schedule, we will now continue to proceed our next session. The next session will begin shortly.
Sorry for that.
It's now time for our final session of the day, Panel Discussion 5. This session is about advancing inclusive and equitable digital ecosystems and an open and democratic internet. Please join me in welcoming virtually the moderator for this session, Brian Patrick Evangelista, Country Director, Cernter for International Private Enterprise. Now let's meet our esteemed panelists who are joining us virtually from afar. Gina Romero, founder and head of special projects Connected Women. Rana Heufers, executive director, Center for Indonesian Policy Studies. Can you all hear us well?
Yes, we can. Good afternoon.
Great. Now I'll hand the floor to the moderator.
Thank you very much, and a pleasant afternoon to all of you. My name is Ryan Evangelista from the Center for International Private Enterprise, and we're coming in live from Manila and Jakarta for our session on advancing inclusive and equitable digital ecosystems and an open and democratic internet. An open, secure, and accessible internet is essential for advancing resilient democracies and economies. The emergence and proliferation of new technologies are prompting critical discussions about the role of technology in societies and economies and ways in which the government and citizens interact, and the challenges to democratic governance, the rule of law, and human rights. Ensuring inclusive and equitable digital ecosystems and an open and secure democratic internet that safeguards digital rights requires continued investments in strengthening digital skills, building digital literacy, and digital resilience, especially among underrepresented groups and marginalized communities, as well as advocacy and public-private cooperation. To offer perspectives on how business, civil society, and the government can strengthen democratic governance, market competitiveness, and safeguard fundamental democratic rights through grassroots initiatives and efforts, we're joined by two distinguished and inspiring leaders from Southeast Asia. Our first speaker is Gina Romero. Gina is a Filipino-British entrepreneur, community builder, and technology advocate. She's the founder and head of special projects at Connected Women, a socially responsible AI and digital task outsourcing community that aims to improve the lives of Filipino women through meaningful online work. Gina launched Connected Women in Singapore in 2013 as part of her mission to better equip women entrepreneurs and professionals with the technology skills to scale their business and careers. Connected Women has since received global recognition in the categories of inclusive innovation, the future of work, e-employment, and women's empowerment. Gina is a proud recipient of the Outstanding Women in the Nation's Service or TOWNS Award, which recognizes the outstanding dedication, exceptional talent, and a history of contributing positively to society. Our second speaker is Rainer Heufers, Executive Director of the Center for Indonesian Policy Studies, or CHIPS. Rainer guides institutional development and supervises the research and communication efforts at CHIPS. He spent more than 3 decades on public policy research and project management concerning the economic transition in the People's Republic of China and the Republic of Indonesia. He's the founder and managing director of CF Solutions Private Limited, a Singapore-based training and consulting firm that provides strategic counseling, public policy consulting, leadership training, and organizational development, as well as other services. We will start by hearing a short introductory remarks and presentation from each of our panelists and provide a brief background about their organization, overall context about the topic, and in relation to their programs and initiatives. We'll start with you, Gina.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, and fellow participants of the Taiwan Internet Governance Forum 2023. It's my pleasure to join you today. to share a little bit about the work that we've been doing here in Manila, Connected Women. So Connected Women's mission is to elevate the lives of Filipino women through socially responsible online work. Our vision is to power the inclusive workplace of the future by bringing women into tech at scale. We have a large community, very diverse community, around 135,000 members now, with active chapters, mostly in the Philippines, all across the Philippines, but also in Singapore, Pakistan, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and Vietnam. We also have a few members in Taiwan. We've trained 58,000 women in skills for the digital economy, including digital business using Meta platforms in partnership with Meta. And we've since trained over 1,000 women now in skills for the artificial intelligence industry, starting with data annotation. And we also run community meetups across the country where volunteers support each other in sharing different skills that they need to thrive in the digital economy. So in the context of today's discussion, I'd like to talk about the learnings that we've had at Connected Women in terms of advancing inclusive digital ecosystems. In particular, we're focusing on the AI industry right now because we recognize the potential to empower women through emerging and frontier technologies. We know that the digital economy has a tremendous potential for empowering women. AI's potential to expand economic opportunities for women, especially those from underserved groups, really unlocks digital innovation and fosters inclusive growth. Ensuring that responsible and inclusive development of AI and other emerging technologies is really vital. And so what we do at Connected Women is we ensure that we bring inclusivity into the design, development, implementation, and use of digital technology and AI systems, all levels. The economic landscape for women in the Philippines, well, we still have a gender gap, especially in the digital divide. In fact, according to statistics on our labor force, only 44% of women are participating compared to 69% of men. But we really believe that remote, flexible jobs and digital upskillings will actually break down some of these barriers and allow women to participate in the digital economy. So two of the areas that we really advocate for is integrating women's empowerment into any global or regional or local governance architectures. We focus on the literacy component, so the digital and data literacy and AI literacy. These are really essential for women's participation in the digital economy. We have initiatives at Connected Women, including one program called Elevate IDA, where we train women in the grassroots to take data for AI and machine learning tools. So for us, it's really about having more women involved in the entire process of developing new technologies, from examining training data, understanding how algorithms work, and of course, continuing to monitor and capture and address biases in AI system design, development, and use. We also advocate for ethical supply chains. There are a lot of news and reports about the exploitation of vulnerable groups, in particular those sitting invisibly behind AI systems and emerging technologies. So we want to speak up and voice out the risk of exploitation of these vulnerable groups, for example, the data labelers that train systems like ChatGPT or other AI engines. So I believe that involving specialized social enterprises like Connected Women in discussions like this is important, so that those from marginalized communities and underrepresented segments, so that we can make sure that all voices are heard, including those from communities like ours. So in conclusion, I think everyone recognizes the gender disparity in technology, posing significant risks to society at large. We believe that we need to integrate women's empowerment principles into all governance related to emerging technologies to make sure that they're not just participating, but are also literate when it comes to technology's potential and associated risks. We want to see the full and equal participation of women in AI across all levels. We really believe that ensuring and advocating for women's meaningful participation in emerging technologies is key to creating an equitable digital landscape. So in conclusion, we really believe that gender-responsive AI governance principles should be integrated into global and regional architectures and economic policies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gina. And you will now hear from Rainer. Rainer, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Ryan. Let me share also. Right, so I would like to echo what Gina said. It's an honor to be here to speak at the Taiwan IGF this year. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, SIPE, for arranging this session, having me as a speaker. As Ryan said earlier, my name is Rainer Heufers. I'm with the Center for Indonesian Policy Studies, an independent think tank in Jakarta. And the areas that we're working on are broader than just digital economy. So we work on agriculture, food security, education, but also on economic opportunities. And within that area of economic opportunities, we work a lot on the issues of the digital sphere that includes digital economy and also the social aspect and freedom of speech aspects. Just a brief overview, we are among the top think tanks in the country with a large number of media coverage and paper downloads just last year. And we, as I said, we work very much on digital economy in the country. Indonesia is as tech savvy as the Philippines are. So we have lots of startups, decathlons, unicorns. The biggest growth we have is in on-demand services, financial technology, and e-commerce. With these sectors, the digital economy is growing massively in the country, and we see that a little in how Indonesia pushes the DEFA negotiations under its current chairmanship of ASEAN. And I believe we're going to discuss that maybe later in the discussion. In response, the government is coming up with a lot of different regulations under several ministries. There is a certain amount of incoherence. We do now have a personal data protection law, and we do have a national digital economy framework. So the country is trying to deal with all of this. What our think tank is doing, CHIPS, we are suggesting co-regulation in the digital economy. We believe the sector is growing so fast and innovation is so rapid that it is impossible for the government to stay on top of what is happening. And so we argue that it has to engage meaningfully with the private sector in order to not just draft policy, but also enforce policy. So we're writing several papers about this, how to involve the private sector in the digital economy. One of such solutions is the regulatory sandbox, where we wrote recently about in the fintech industry. So it basically means a certain amount of self-regulation in the industry side. Code of conduct, do we need to define it exactly who is supposed to be and who's allowed to be engaged on the private sector side. But what we are really saying is we need strong actors on the government side and the private sector side to act together, to work together to make sure the regulations stay on top of what is happening in the country. And as our think tank, we work on 5 different areas in which we suggest co-regulation. There is the protection, of course, of data privacy, where we have lots of issues that we need to deal with. This is just a selection that I'm showing you right now. Where you need this kind of dialogue and collaboration. Access to data, there are quite strong attempts by the government to have access to the data that is stored by the online platforms. We have been quite critical of that. Again, we can discuss that a little later. We have, as I said, freedom of expression issues. The question is negative and prohibited content. The previous panel touched upon this quite a bit. This is a difficult matter that hopefully we can deal with again in our discussion a little later, because of course what we see also in Europe, the Digital Services Act that we now have also has raised criticism towards its infringement on press freedom and freedom of expression in Europe, and likewise we have similar issues in Indonesia. Consumer protection is extremely necessary, however, the system is so weak in the country that hardly any complaints are made formally, and it's also hard to take these things to court. So this requires a lot of thinking, innovative thinking on how things can be solved for the consumers once there is a complaint that is not addressed by the companies. And finally, cybersecurity. The numbers are staggering. It's incredible how many cases of cyber attacks there are in a year. 976 million in 2022. The year before was far beyond 1 billion. So there are ideas and initiatives to come up with a cybersecurity law, but that's a very difficult topic where TIPS also takes quite a critical stance. So this is something that again requires close cooperation between both sides. And when I say public-private, I also mean, of course, engagement of the civil society in this. Yeah, so we're working with the different ministries in the country to actually persuade them to come up with co-regulation in all of these sectors. We have lots of events that we do each year, and our flagship event is every year, the CHIPS Digi Week. It's our flagship conference. This year we had 700 participants there from government, private sector, academia, etc. And this is really where we bring key players together in closed-door roundtables, but also in other forums. And in the past, we had the wonderful support of SIPE for this, and we're looking forward to having people on this conference as well to join us in the CHIPS Digi Week 2024. So this is it in a nutshell about CHIPS, and I pass this back now to Ryan.
Thank you very much, Rainer, and thank you very much, Gina, for a very good presentation and introduction to the work that you're doing and how aligned these are to the myriad of issues that we have on digital governance and more so digital space. We're going to proceed with some panel discussion, and I'd invite Gina and Rainer to join me to discuss some of the questions in different topics as you laid out in your presentations. The first questions I would ask are making reference to digital rights and governance. And Gina and Rainer, if you could help address this question on the emerging legal frameworks when it comes to regulation about AI and fair competition in this space. A number of landmark legal frameworks coming from the European Union have aimed at regulating and addressing concerns related to privacy, content moderation, as well as fair competition and AI governance. This includes, for example, Digital Services Act, the Digital Markets Act, as well as the AI Act, which are all comprehensive in a way in defining different sets of accountability standards, transparency, and regulations on operations of online activities and environment. How do you see these kinds of policy frameworks impacting the development of similar roadmaps, particularly in the context of ASEAN, where I understand that there's also an emerging trend of visiting or putting together tightened frameworks when it comes to the movement of digital activities, more so digital commerce. Maybe I'll start with you, Gina.
Thank you, Ryan. So, again, coming from an organization that represents women in the grassroots, we really look at these different policy frameworks from the human rights perspective. And, I really see glaring gaps in the level of detail that outlines the protection of women, not just from a sort of algorithmic perspective, but from an inclusivity perspective. So I don't come from a law background, so really speaking from my own observations on the ground, but I feel that strengthening some of these regulations and really looking and explicitly addressing the integration of women's empowerment principles and ethical supply chains, I think is very critical, because unfortunately, we already have a growing digital divide. And if we don't address these critical issues in future-looking frameworks, then we're at risk of widening the digital divide. And I think there's a lot of talk about how do we really shrink this digital divide or address it, but unfortunately, not a lot of very practical solutions out there that really do solve the problem at the crux.
Thank you, Gina. Rainer, your thoughts?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. It's a difficult topic. When I look at the Digital Services Act, Digital Markets Act, and others, then I see that, of course, it sets certain benchmarks which sound desirable to us coming from civil society, because it phrases a certain amount of things in a very good way. However, I'm rather critical to try to implement them in the countries where we're working. Implementing them as in like having local regulations that kind of like copy or imitate what is said in Europe, for example, because Europe responds to its situation. It fights with American dominance on the technological side, because Europe basically doesn't have technological giants like you have in Silicon Valley. So it's a very European response to America. And when you take that then to a country like Indonesia, you can sometimes see, quite often actually, how national regulators would try to come up with regulations that sound almost identical to the EU GDPR or to the Services Act, etc. But the difference is that in Europe, you have, to a larger extent, an established system of the rule of law, whereas you have it much less in a country like Indonesia. So context matters a lot. So whereas in Europe, they would say, you need to comply with certain standards, you have to take down certain content within a certain amount of time, there is still due process. So there are law accords that the companies can actually address if they feel that whatever the government is requesting is not really how they interpret the law. However, in Indonesia, you do not have that. In Indonesia, the government would be quick to block certain providers from access to the internet. We had that last year when PayPal and Yahoo were suddenly blocked because they didn't open up access to their data to the government. So in a way, a local government here in Indonesia would be much more trigger happy than what that would be at the European Union. And that makes a huge difference in the way you apply it. And just as a case in point, yesterday, Amazon won against the European Union in a court of law in Luxembourg, suing them over the Digital Services Act, because they were considered as a very large online platform, and therefore they would have to disclose all their advertisements and how they're being used, etc., and all the data and all the funds. And they won substantively against the European Union in this case, saying we're not a very large online platform in the sense defined by the Digital Services Act. None of this would be possible in Indonesia. No company would be able to take the Indonesian government to court and still have a meaningful representation in the country. So that's why I believe we need to, yes, look at it as a benchmark, but not necessarily just aim to implement it in the country. I believe sometimes it's better to have no regulation rather than bad regulation.
Thank you, Rainer, and thank you, Gina and Rainer, for the very good points. I'd like to follow through a quick question with your responses, and this relates also with both of you having grown up in EU and then in an environment where there's probably stronger democracy, regulatory frameworks, and the like. And when you assess, for example, both the Philippines and Jakarta probably were in the mainstream of emerging economies, both emerging economies and democracies are also emerging. How do you think that the private sector and civil society should respond, but at the same time be prepared for emerging regulatory frameworks such as the ones that I mentioned earlier and such as the ones you touched on? And where do you think can the government and the private sector and civil society could come together to ensure and build probably a more robust multi-stakeholder dialogue and process to ensure that when we abide and put together key policy frameworks that are nuanced to certain country perspectives and country needs, that we're also using a framework that is credible enough and that is enables private sector and civil society progress in our democracies. So your thoughts on this?
Will I jump in first?
Gina, please go ahead.
Yeah, so I think, again, representing those in the grassroots, here in the Philippines and in similar developing countries, I think that it's a little bit difficult to define the private sector as kind of like MSME, like you would in other parts of the world. I mean, we have such a huge informal economy in the Philippines. And, when you talk about gig workers, for example, in the Philippines, not like freelance workers or especially digital freelance workers, it's probably a little bit or very different to countries like, for example, the UK, where gig work is either a transitional type of work from traditional work or perhaps a side hustle, right? Another way to earn on top of your existing work. In the Philippines, we have gig workers who are literally reliant on income generated through informal work to feed their families. So some of these different regulations that have been coming out in the Philippines have also caused some controversy, because if we have micro sellers, for example, who are selling products online and earning to feed their family, but now they're expected to go through a mainstream business setup process, which is not very accessible, then it puts them at risk. And, there was some talk of platform regulation where every seller on a platform needs to be treated kind of in a similar way, right? They need to be set up as a business and follow all of the compliance. And it's just not possible for some of these entrepreneurs. I mean, they're not always even educated in a traditional sense. So to be able to go through compliance processes and tax submission processes that you would expect an educated, experienced business person to go through is just not reasonable. So one of the things that we're curious about and working on at Connected Women is, how do we really support the informal sector while also putting in place regulations that protect consumers and everything else?
Very great points, Gina. Rainer?
Yeah, I just follow up exactly on what Gina was saying. What we have seen lately in Indonesia, just last week, is an initiative to ban social media from actually engaging in social commerce. So the president came down very hard and said we need to separate social media from social commerce. Any commercial activities on social media should be banned. This had been watered down by now. So this is now watered down to the sense that the Ministry of Trade comes up with a regulation saying that social media is at least allowed to issue invoices and to actually directly engage in commercial activities. So it's a little watered down. But what we see here is that the market vendors who complained, and we're note very well, of course, we are in an election campaign period in this country. The market vendors were very dissatisfied with the fact that you buy the goods also on social media or TikTok or wherever that are like a third cheaper than what they sell in the markets. And so they complain, and of course they get the ears of the politicians slightly more when there's a campaign period than when not. But Gina said quite right, we need to also look at the consumer. So if a consumer is getting a t-shirt for a third less than anywhere else, that is a big, of course, a big advantage for a vast majority of people. Plus, you have also some of the informal businesses operating through the social media channels. We have millions of informal entrepreneurs operating through those platforms on Facebook and on TikTok, etc. So I think, Brian, you were asking about civil society and the role of it. I believe we need to be very careful on the civil society side to really always just do a very careful analysis on cause and effects. Because it's too easy to follow the loudspeakers of some people who are saying this is unfair, this is unjust, we should do this, we should do that. We should really analyze carefully. What is it that serves people better? Just as Gina was saying just now, what is it really that helps people in the informal economy? You can't just say we should formalize all those employment it's just not happening. It's not an option for a lot of people to go into the formal sector. So we need to find better solutions, more suitable to the context. And I think civil society plays a large role there. And I guess digital literacy is something else that both of our organizations work on. Maybe we can talk about that a bit later.
Certainly, Rainer, and that's actually the question that I would raise in the next questions. And both of you are very engaged with respect to promoting and supporting digital skills, digital literacy, and enabling environment for digital commerce activities to prosper. Indonesia and the Philippines are two of the most dynamic countries in our region, with incredible market size in terms of digital economy and young people who make up significant percentage of the population. But despite the growth of our digital economies, there's still an unevenness persists as a barrier to inclusive digital transformation and growth. From your perspective and your experience working in this two somehow connected countries, how do you think we can democratize digital transformation and address the current digital divide that exists? For Rainer, probably I'll start with you. How do you think we should strengthen digital skills and resilience among the underrepresented groups and marginalized communities? And for Gina, more specific about the work of Connected Women, in working with MSMEs and strengthening digital skills of women in AI, what have been the important lessons that you think we should continue to inspire as a bigger message to the world and to the community that we serve? I'll start with you, Rainer.
Sure, thank you, Ryan. Two aspects matter, I believe. One is digital infrastructure, as ICT infrastructure, and the other one is the skills and the literacy. On the infrastructure side, I think a country like Indonesia, Philippines alike, I mean, this country is quite similar when it comes to being an archipelago, and certain islands or parts of islands are far more developed than others. So here it's quite a costly thing to actually increase the ICT infrastructure and make it reach remote areas because it's an archipelago. Nevertheless, these solutions need to be found. The more cheaper way might be to build broadband internet, but the more reliable one would be fixed broadband. So these are things that should be prioritized. I have a certain hope that the next president coming in next year might put that on their we only have male candidates on his priority list for the next presidency, because this is crucial, that people actually have access in the first place. And then, second point, we need to see that they then have the literacy to actually deal with this when it comes to accessing all these tools, especially fintech, because obviously this gives people access to loans and so on, and they need to have some sort of understanding how to operate in this environment, which is completely new to a lot of people. What CHIPS, my organization, does, we work quite a bit on how to measure digital literacy. So the government has its tools, how to measure digital literacy, there's an index, etc. So we're making suggestions how to improve the index to especially include younger people. I believe there's also much room for improvement when it comes to measuring digital literacy between men and women, boys and girls. I think there can be large improvements made, and that with this improved data sets, the government might also then be able to improve its responses, its digital literacy programs. But what we've seen lately is the government has deprioritized digital literacy in the school curriculum, and so we have very much advocated to put that back on again, so that, you know, this is really something that even in the remote areas, kids learn from young age onwards.
Thank you, Rainer. And Gina, please go ahead.
Thank you. So, well, we have a very diverse community at Connected Women, 135,000 women. And these women, some of them come from professional roles, senior leadership roles, in fact, and the large majority come from the grassroots. Sometimes they're completely inexperienced. They've never worked in a traditional work environment, or they've come from overseas work, perhaps domestic work or other manual labor. But the way that we look at it is that the digital upskilling and literacy has to happen at all different levels. I mean, you know, we have women from conflict affected areas in the Philippines and even fisher communities who have been able to learn how to do data labeling for AI systems. Of course, that's a very entry-level sort of technology role, but it's a start. For us, it's about opening their minds to the idea that they can actually be participants in the digital economy. And, it's amazing because they really join the programs because they need to earn from home. We provide flexible remote work opportunities once they've been upskilled. And so they really join because they need to earn. It's mainly a financial necessity. But once they join the program, they actually see their own potential to continue to upskill in this field. And considering that we have a massive global problem with lack of women's participation in the technology space, this is a way that we feel that we can really bring women, from these different backgrounds and disadvantaged groups into technology. It's a long road to bring someone who's a fisher folk, who's learning technology basics, to helping her become a data scientist. But we believe it's possible. We're seeing that type of opportunity. But I think it's also important to look at, the senior leaders. I'm here in Kuching actually right now at the World Congress on Innovation and Technology, and listening to futurists and leaders from all over the country and all over the world, in fact, talking about AI. And a lot of fear, of course, when it comes to emerging technologies. But I think some of my ladies in the grassroots probably have a better grasp of how AI works than some of these corporate CEOs, because they're handling the data, they understand how the AI learns. So, I think that's very interesting, but I think we also need to make sure that, especially regulators, policymakers, anyone building laws and governing these technologies has a fundamental understanding and grasp of how it really works, because I don't think that always happens, unfortunately. So we're really at the start of a very big shift, and upskilling at all levels is absolutely essential.
Thank you, Gina and Rainer. Talking about legal frameworks and building consensus among regional bodies such as the ASEAN. Last month, the ASEAN began negotiations for the Digital Economy Framework Agreement, or DIFA, which will probably be one of the first major region-wide digital economy agreements in the world. Some of the core elements of this will include digital trade, cross-border e-commerce, cybersecurity, digital ID, digital payments, and among many other issues and topics, or many other important layers of the way we access and use digital platforms. My first question in relation to this is, how do you think our countries and your stakeholders are familiar already with this emerging potential regional framework that is done in our scale, in our landscape? And the second is, what do you think are the potential of making this ASEAN-wide agreement prosper, but at the same time be a guiding principle to leverage bigger and more profound, I guess, understanding and role of regional bodies in promoting and supporting, to a degree, advancements of technology and digital activities? Maybe Rainer, I'll start with you, and then Gina, feel free to share your thoughts.
Yeah, sure. TIPS was the task to do the readiness assessment of the Indonesian government of Indonesia for DEFA in the Bengawai Seri roadmap of ASEAN. So we did that for the Ministry of Trade, and so did quite a bit of analysis on DEFA. And maybe before I answer your question, there's a big short background, Ryan. So basically, DEFA tries not to set new objectives, but tries to basically work with within the existing commitments, right? I think that's clear. And here, in our analysis, we came to the conclusion that we believe certain areas are already well enough covered. That would be paperless trade, cross-border paperless trade, cross-border e-commerce. We have data protection and privacy, as well as cybersecurity. There are already agreements within ASEAN. that are quite strong and can be used. There are certain others that would need more elaboration, and that would be, as you mentioned, digital identity. There's still more work to be done in that area. Talent mobility, quite a lot, which would probably also affect Gina's work quite a bit there, I believe. Talent mobility, ICT infrastructure, I mentioned that earlier. There is lots to be done in ASEAN on that. And finally, digital payments. And with this, I then come to your question, Ryan. What I see where we can actually move forward more quickly and where we will then see impact, and that's also where we believe the Indonesian government holding the ASEAN chair at the moment should really put a lot of emphasis, is on digital payments. Because we see, of course, it's in the interest of Indonesia as one of the largest provider of digital services in the region, second largest investment country for digital investments after Singapore. So Indonesia has a very strong interest in this, and of course the ability to actually enjoy services, digital services in another ASEAN country, and being able to use digital payment using your own bank account in your home country. By now with a QR code, most likely we have that already between Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore. So this is growing. Philippines will, I believe, join soon. So this is something we believe digital payments is something where consumers will see and experience firsthand if they're traveling, that this will really make a big difference and would help also create some sort of feeling of identity, I believe, within ASEAN. Second one would be align personal data protection standards. This will be increasingly important since we all have in the countries personal data laws, protection laws, that quite often requires that data can only go to another country if the other country has a very good data protection standard. So it would really enhance cross-border investment and collaboration, economic collaboration, if there were aligned standards. On personal data protection, that is something we believe can be pushed further and quicker. Thirdly, cybersecurity, even though there is already a good set of agreements, we believe cybersecurity is something that can be strengthened, in particular, again, to support the digital payments that were mentioned in the first place. And finally, the electronic certificates of origin, which in ASEAN therefore is referred to as e-form D, these would be enormously important. It's already there, it does exist, but it should really be promoted much more so that we do have digital trade on a different level than before. So I think it's a good initiative. As always, an agreement has to show in practice, in the real life of people, which quite often it doesn't, and then people feel ASEAN as a theoretical concept somewhere. But if we push ahead with the payments, I think that will be the most tangible result for a lot of people in ASEAN.
Thank you, Rainer. And Rainer, just to also ask, in terms of awareness, do you think that there's enough understanding already of both the positive implications, but also the way this kinds of structures, as you mentioned, in the agreement would help improve, but also strengthen the way we do business and strengthen the way our constituents and stakeholders would be able to appreciate the role of regional bodies such as ASEAN and our governments on supporting better governance on digital activities?
Yeah, I do believe there is room for improvement, Ryan. I believe, we would be able to measure that on the business side in utilization rates. So if we have an ASEAN framework and we could see and measure that businesses are actually using it and trade along these rules, that will show us very clear evidence whether businesses are picking it up. But that would require socialization on the side of the government. So we need proper databases, websites, etc., by all the national governments helping their domestic industries to actually deal with this. At the moment, I believe it's still very much a specialist kind of conversation. A couple of government representatives, a couple of civil society players, experts. It has to go broader, particularly on the business side, and in particular to the small and medium-sized enterprises, obviously, so that they understand this is happening. But there are relevant initiatives out there. ASEAN also is pushing for tender and procurement for SMEs. It's all there, but we will have to see it actually happening. And for that, we really need to measure it in the utilization rate.
Thank you, Rainer. Gina, please go ahead.
So I think I'll take this opportunity just to voice out our advocacy around the digital workers. I think I don't know if something like DEFA would actually take into account the level of detail that we would like to see when it comes to the protection of digital workers. But I think it's very important that we recognize and acknowledge that behind all of these emerging technologies, there's a very big human workforce still required. The topic of content moderation has come up many times, but actually behind content moderation, even content moderation that is using AI tools, there is still a lot of human workers behind this. And you may or may not be aware of this type of work, but it's definitely one of the most unpleasant jobs that anyone would have to do. Cleaning and scrutinizing the internet for flagged up inappropriate content. I know there was a topic about this earlier. So, but the question is, this work is being done, this work needs to be done, and many other types of less traumatic work needs to be done to build AI and other digital systems. But who is doing this work? And they're pretty much invisible for the most part. I'm not sure whether or not separate frameworks for digital workers need to exist that are referenced or integrated into these types of policies. I'm not coming from a legal background or policy background, but I really believe that this cannot be overlooked. We can't talk about content moderation without talking about the ethical treatment of the people behind this type of work. And I think there needs to be more transparency around the workforce that sits behind AI systems, so that big tech that utilize these massive workforces are held accountable for making sure that the treatment of these workers is ethical. And so, I hope that as part of some of these various frameworks, that there really is a closer scrutiny of the practices that companies are integrating into their sort of digital platform and AI building.
Thank you very much, Ria. Very well said indeed. And that brings me to my next question. But before I go there, I just wanted to check later on, I think if we have time to respond to one or two questions from the audience, we'll be happy to do so. We're down to the final minutes of our activity or our session. And Gina and Rainer, you mentioned about the role of government in earlier discussions, and I think this is a good way to look into how government plays out in terms of really providing both the policy space, but also the anticipation of how to promote or strengthen governance frameworks and principles for future technology penetration and particularly in strengthening the different mechanisms for innovation. Our own Chief Justice in the Philippines, Alexander Hesmundo, who recently spoke at the Social Goods Summit in Manila, where Maria Ressa and Secretary Hillary Clinton were prominently featured as speakers as well, mentioned that given how variable technology can be, there's no clear-cut set of norms, and that there should be recommendation on introduction of anticipatory governance, which is that mindset of adaptability that looks far ahead and prepares for the future. He also mentioned that government should not be left blindsided by technological advances, instead take on a more proactive approach in dealing with its possible consequences. How do you think that private sector, industry groups, civil society, and many other stakeholders can take the lead in helping position and advance regulations that support dialogues around government's emerging technology? Our governance of emerging technology, and what do you think the role of the private sector can be in terms of anticipatory governance as defined earlier by the Chief Justice? For Rainer, how do you see the role of co-regulation, and in this regard, being CHIPS is one of the real good players in promoting and supporting co-regulation and sandboxes in their digital frameworks, as well as advancing private sector partnerships on adoption of emerging technologies. So maybe Gina, I'll start with you, and Rainer. Go ahead, Gina.
Well, I'm always amazed when Connected Women is invited to discussions like this, honestly. It's not the path I ever expected that I would be on, but I think that, you know, the more I participate in these types of forums, I realize how important it is to have organizations like Connected Women. I mean, we fall under private sector because we're a for-profit social enterprise, but we have a very specific experience and very specific perspective on the areas that we're working in. And I think a lot of these areas are often overlooked. Other than Connected Women, there are counterparts that work with differently abled people and all different marginalized segments of society, those who work with conflict-affected areas, those deprived of liberty, and all the rest. So I think that it's really important to include specialized groups like Connected Women into that private sector category, and make sure that they're really able to voice out very specific concerns with, you know, coming from the ground up. Connected Women doesn't really work directly with or consult for government. I mean, we're private sector. We operate pretty much with our communities, but we do consult for various different, you know, activities and roundtables. So I think I was actually invited to participate in a similar discussion with the UN about a global governance framework for artificial intelligence, looking at it, of course, from the UN point of view, and they're advocating for a global framework which is UN-led with a focus on human rights. And, you know, so I think there are going to be many different lenses that we can look at this issue, right? But I think the more diverse the conversation and the more representation at the table, the more effective the outcomes will be. We can't, aside from maybe very generic recommendations and very generic protections that we can put in place, it's very difficult to predict emerging technology and the impact and the negative impact of them. So I think that from my perspective, I think there will always be a reactive component. How agile we are in responding, I think, is really key.
Thank you, Gina. Rainer, please go ahead.
Yeah, whenever there is a new technology and then there is the talk in town that the government is planning a regulation, everybody is always up on their feet of like, what is happening? We need to find out what the ministries are thinking about. And so, is it helpful? Is it not? And everybody's, have you got the latest draft of regulation, and how do we respond to this? So this is also in the area of AI. So everybody is wondering, where is this going? There's a law on technology and science, which in charge is the National Science Association. They would say we need to include AI here. Then others argue from the personal data protection position and say it has to be in that area. And so then immediately some ministries came up and said, we are in charge. No, we are in charge. Everybody wants to issue new regulations. Now we have, after the personal data protection law, we have implementing guidelines that are being drafted. And they just simply, in a long list of guidelines, they just call them new technologies. So talking about everything under the sun when it comes to personal data protection, everything related to AI just comes under new technologies. We need to find new solutions for new technologies. So basically, in a way, if I may say so, they gave up on this and thought we can't cover it. But this is where I see the problem, you know. AI isn't just a new technology. AI is going to really completely change the way we work. It has an impact on everything that we're dealing with. And since most of the things we're dealing with by now are somewhat related to the internet, it'll change everything. And so we need really far-reaching solutions. as I said, I am critical, or rather skeptical, of following the EU rules like the DSA, DSM. I am rather skeptical whether we should do this now just following UN or OECD standards for AI. As I said, I think they are good benchmarks, but the way a benchmark is being implemented in Europe, United States, Latin America is going to be different from what it is in the Philippines or in Indonesia. It depends very much who is in charge, who is in power, how are things being applied. So yes, I believe the best way to do this is really by opening up keyword co-regulation, sitting together and looking at the new technologies, testing out solutions. We had that a lot with regulatory sandboxes, where companies were saying we have a new AI solution, but we don't know to what extent we are actually in line with the laws, or are we violating the laws? Or rather, there is no law that seems to cover the things that we are trying to do with our new technologies. That's when a sandbox should come in. But then sandboxes themselves need to be improved. It's not just enough to say, yeah, let's apply it and observe it and then later come up with recommendations. No, you need to come up with a very clear result after the sandbox that the company knows at the end, when it comes to the exiting of the sandbox, are you approved to use this technology or not? Can you be taken to court or not if you do this in this country? And this kind of definitive answer is not yet given, at least here in Indonesia. So that lies in the detail. A lot of things can be done, and this can only be done between private and public sector together.
Very good points, Rainer and Gina. I think we have some time to open the floor for some questions with the audience, and I'd like to invite our audience in Taiwan if there's anything you'd like to raise with our very esteemed, well-versed panelists, Rainer and Gina.
Is there any question from the floor? We have no question from the floor.
Thank you very much. With that, I think we can ask Gina and Rainer for their final remarks. And this is basically just to reorient our thoughts on the way forward. Rainer, being head of a think tank and being in a very important position, bridging knowledge and understanding between the private sector, civil society, and the government. Where do you think this collaboration with this different, diverse, but very important stakeholders can lead up in shaping the governance framework for an open, safe, and democratic internet governance? And Gina, being in a very strong position of really supporting and empowering women in AI and digital economy and with digital skills programs and training, where do you see the role, the bigger role of institutions with the private sector and civil society as well in improving and strengthening inclusivity amongst the different stakeholders in the digital field or digital ecosystem? Rainer, start with you, and Gina, you're next.
Yeah, I'll make it very brief. You know, when you say open, safe, and everything, internet, I mean, sounds so easy, but there's so many contradictions within it. If you are open, can you be safe? You know, and to what extent do you need to protect? And then who do you protect? Do you protect the consumers? Do you protect the producers? There's usually, you have to choose between the four. So my strong opinion is that the internet has basically brought a lot of benefits. We have a huge increase in financial inclusion due to fintech and other solutions. We have opportunities on the education side. We have opportunities on so many levels due to the fact that we have internet and we have digital solutions. I saw in Gina's presentation earlier, also she saw the opportunities presented by AI. There are so many good things that are coming. So I just believe that when the government kicks in now in order to regulate, it has to be extremely cautious in order not to really suppress these benefits that are there for the intention of protecting. Because sometimes you want to protect somebody from engaging in the internet, but you forget that that person might be even worse off if that person had no access to the internet. So you need to have a very rational decision making here and not to kill the opportunities in order to just merely protect, which might be more of a political impulse rather than a rational impulse. So yeah, that's what I believe. We need to make sure that people can still enjoy all the benefits, and especially Indonesia and the Philippines that have such a digitally active population. These are comparative advantages of our two countries in the world economy, and it would be foolish to kill them before you actually reap the benefits.
Thank you, Rainer. Gina, please go ahead.
So I think there are a lot of critical issues that are being discussed with great urgency, but unfortunately I see that these issues are being discussed almost in silo. So the lack of women's participation in STEM fields is being discussed in certain forums. The digital divide, in particular looking at those from marginalized groups, is also being discussed, and a lot of solutions being discussed in different forums also. And then of course, talent, digital talent, and the protection of digital workers is also being discussed. But I think that we can't really build meaningful technology frameworks or protections unless we bring these into the same conversation, because I think a lot of the challenges of the future will be around these three areas, as well as the other regulatory concerns that have been raised. So I do think that these issues are big enough and warrant more focused discussion in the broader context of technology governance.
Thank you very much, Gina and Rainer, for this very insightful conversation. Our discussions on advancing inclusive and equitable digital ecosystems and fostering an open democratic internet have highlighted the importance of digital rights, digital skills and literacy, public-private partnerships, and shared responsibility in co-regulation. Digital rights and skills are the foundation upon which an inclusive and equitable digital ecosystem is built on. We must continue to champion these rights, ensuring that every individual has the knowledge and agency to navigate the digital landscape effectively. Public-private partnerships have emerged as a powerful tool for addressing complex digital challenges. By working together, governments, businesses, and civil society can create policies and practices that protect digital rights while promoting innovation and economic growth. Shared responsibility and co-regulation is key to striking the balance between security and openness to the internet. It requires collaboration among all stakeholders to develop regulatory frameworks that are effective, adaptable, and respectful of individual freedoms. As we move forward, we should remain committed to these principles, learning from the initiatives of Connected Women and CHIPS on advocating for digital rights, investing in digital skills, and fostering partnerships, and embracing shared responsibility in co-regulation. We can ensure that the digital age is defined by inclusivity, equity, openness, and democracy. Thank you to your dedication to these important goals, Rainer and Gina. We wish you all the best in shaping a digital future that benefits everyone and upholds the democratic values we hold on to. Thank you again to IGF for this opportunity for us to be part of this session, and we look forward to more engaging sessions with you in the future. Back to you there in Taiwan. We wish you a good afternoon.
Thank you, Mr. Evangelista, for moderating the session, and thank you to all panelists for an animated discussion. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we have now concluded day one of our two-day event TWIGF 2023. We want to express our sincere gratitude for your active participation throughout the day. We kindly request you to take a moment to scan the survey QR code and complete the questionnaire. Your valuable feedback will help us gain insights into your thoughts and opinions. We have another exciting day ahead filled with more insightful discussions. Please join us again tomorrow at 9:30 as we continue our exploration. Thank you.